All right, hey, what's happening? It's Robert Phoenix. Welcome to another edition of the Friday FARcast. And just waiting here for our guest today, Jared Murphy, who is the author of a very interesting book with an interesting premise. And it has to do with the fact that a lot of the ancient history that is in our past is not necessarily attributable to aliens, but us. So we're going to get into that today. And it looks like this is Jared's first work, and it was published by Paranoia Publishing. And he's been making the rounds on the talk show internet circuit. He's been on Coast to Coast AM, a lot of other places. So he's going to be on with us in a few minutes, and we're going to travel back into history and find out what the story is. I think there's also an interesting connection with people like Wim Hof and tapping into extraordinary abilities that we as humans theoretically have, but have been cut off from. And in a time where we're experiencing more and more truncation and contraction and so we're looking for gravity, compression. It seems as though we're at an apex. And that apex is really about being able to expand beyond where we've been. And every time we come to a point of expansion, there seems to be a bit of a choke point. So we're going to discuss that today with our guest. And I think he's arrived, although he has a different name, Arthur Aliens, not Jared Murphy. Well, let's bring our guest on today, Mr. Arthur Aliens.
Yeah, hi. That's my idea of flouting Facebook's rules, and I only do Facebook for interviews.
You only do Facebook for interviews?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube and I'm on notaliens.com, but I don't do Facebook otherwise. So
right.
So here we are with. I thought it was cute to do Arthur Aliens.
Okay, well, cool. So this doesn't really go on Facebook. This is YouTube. We're streaming on YouTube, but you can be Arthur Aliens all you want. But welcome to the show, Jared. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I could. I don't know. So this is actually the first time I have been on this program. So if I can change that, I will. But
okay.
I don't.
But you feel free to be Arthur Aliens. It's actually kind of quaint. But for those people that are watching and just tuning in, this is Jared Murphy, and he is the author of a new book. How long has this been out, by the way?
So it came out right when I came back from Africa. I was doing research in South Africa at the ruins there near Michael Tellinger's place. And so it came out, we released at midnight about the 27th of January. So, and then of course, nothing like hitting the pandemic day one.
Right.
So we hit this, and I've been on, ironically, the first interview was Coast to Coast. And now I do weekly podcasts and radio shows and go over the book. And I was just on Richard Hoagland's, and I do conflict radio and a number. There's just too much to cover in per se just to promote the book. It's more about our lost ancient history, and there's everything from conscious water, structured water, our genetics, to our ancient megalithic past. And there's just so many different pieces of evidence that whatever you want to talk about today, I could certainly, we can cover wherever you're at.
Okay, cool. So first of all, again, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah.
Appreciate you being here. I'm looking forward to our time together. One of my first guests on, I've been doing this now for 12 years. So one of my first guests was Michael Tellinger. And
cool.
I think I had Michael on in, it must have been either late 2010 or early 2011. And we talked about the big megalithic structure in South Africa. That's really kind of where his work was at that time. He hadn't gotten fully into the whole Ubuntu thing yet. So that was really interesting. And so we talked fairly extensively about that. Some people may not be aware of that. Do you want to kind of fill them in on that structure?
Yeah, well, so Michael, there are two things that Michael is probably most well known for now. One is Adam's Calendar, which is a overlooking, and I was there. It's overlooking a gold mine, which it's considered currently the largest gold mine and the most active and the longest and running site because it dates back to the Anunnaki, the Sumerian culture. It's been mined by the Romans. It's been mined by the Great Zimbabwean, likely Empire. And so this calendar shows it has different alignments, solstices, and assorted other even unknown star tracking. And this calendar was found and established. And the reason they're calling it Adam's calendar is there's some possibility that it could be over 300,000 years old. At a minimum, it's predating history as we know it, at least mainstream. It could be at least 30 or 50,000 years old. So so this Adam's calendar, he calls it that. Not that I'm speaking for Michael, but it's the idea that this calendar may be one of the oldest known monuments on Earth, and it's made out of megalithic blocks that have been intentionally placed to mark these different summer and winter and star events. And it literally is on the edge of a 2,500-foot cliff that overlooks this entire gold mining region. And it's incredible because this entire area has been occupied by at least back to Sumerian times and likely further back. And you have these ancient little mines that have been found that represent the presence of the Egyptians and the presence of these other later cultures like the Zimbabwean nation. And now he has also established, at least in some of his books, on the existence of over, there are tens, hundreds of thousands. The suggestion is that there could be 10 million stone circles. So they're made out of flat rocks, round rocks. What's interesting about the stone circles too is that they're all over. I spent the month of January as his guest, and his beautiful wife Emma's, and we were droning and looking at these ruins. So it's not just that there's stone circles, it's that there are thousands of square kilometers of foundational ruins that the last time anyone archaeologically took a serious look at was in the 30s. And they chalked it up to cattle rings, that these giant stone circles were to keep livestock, whether it's, sheep, horses, cattle. And that's all they were for. But in standard academic models, it's said that there was only a few thousand tribal nomadic peoples. There wasn't any serious, beyond the great nation of Zimbabwe, these ancient not stone built structures. So here's one of the stone circles that it also shows very interesting the geometric alignments. They are all there, but these stone circles, there's not just a few. They are everywhere. And when you look for them, I stood in more than I found a couple myself that no one had looked at in over 30 years. And Waterval Boven, which is the town that this is in, the walls you're looking at, the average elevation is 4,900 to 5,000 feet above sea level. So what you're looking at here is some of what's also considered the greatest climbing in the world. I'm not a great climber, but I do outdoor rock climbing. I love being there. I was able to visit Gustav von Jan's. His site is in that area also. So you can actually go climb. And it's really incredible because these ruins, these stone circles, they are interesting in that some are 12 feet tall. They're about 4 or 5 feet wide. Some are connected to other circles. They're connected to stoneworks that travel down and into valleys. And then what you don't see as you walk over them, as you go over the as you head up above, like that's right there, that picture that you're scrolling at, that's Michael at Adam's calendar. And that he's looking out and you see, oh, that's like really far into the distance. What you don't notice is that at that tree line, the bushes there, that's a straight drop of 2,500 to 3,000 feet to the valley below. It's a stunning view when you just go stand by it. And a lot of people experience a lot of different, I guess you could call it either paranormal or you could call it just your sixth sense. There's definitely a connection at that site for people, and some people have very deep genetic memories that come up, or they have connections to experiences that are definitely not considered your average five senses. So there is some very interesting anomalies. There's geomagnetic anomalies. There's been testing done there. That site is truly incredible. It's on a public reserve. This is a park that you can go to on your own. I personally don't suggest doing that without the guides. Whether you go to Stone Circle Lodge with Michael himself taking you on a tour, or one of his representatives, or this site, Adam's Calendar, is not easily marked on a it's not easy to get to, but it is probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. This area in South Africa, it's incredibly reminds me of Australia. It reminds me of the rolling hills, but we are in a mountainous territory, so there's lots of grassy rolling hills that will make you, some people think they're in Australia, some people think they're in Ireland, some people think you're in anywhere in middle America. But then you have the mountain regions, like where you're scrolling past, where there are walls that are 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 feet tall, and the climbing is just incredible. And there are groups that'll take you out. It's really, really, really fun. So, but I was there at his invite, and the book was wrapping up. I'm with Olaf Phillips of Paranoia Publishing, or Anomalies Press, and Paranoia Magazine. You might be familiar with that. And Olaf, we were wrapping up 6 months of editing, and I had spent almost 3.5 years on the straight research and building the book. And then I was in South Africa, and as I was coming back, we went to market. And so it's kind of like in the world of books yesterday.
Wow. Well, congratulations. It's not always easy to write a book. People don't understand all the work and the time and the effort and the editing that goes into it. But that's always a singular accomplishment in some ways. So one of the things I talked about with Michael the first time I had him on my show, and it was interesting because of the connection with Orion's belt in looked like the lower, was it the southwestern part of that circle? Is that right?
I don't recall that specific alignment, but there are some star alignments there. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that illustration, it had markers for the various seasonal points, solstice, equinox, and there was like that one area that looked like it was open to align with Orion's belt. And a long time ago, I read this pretty interesting book, although fairly out there, and it was written by this guy who was a channel. He went on to write a number of books, and they're all channeled. And he shared the same name with one of O.J. Simpson's lawyers, Robert Shapiro. And he wrote a whole book series of like the explorer race. And I didn't read anything besides the first book, but the first book was pretty compelling. And he talks about this idea of Atlantis, and through this kind of channel perspective. And that when there was this experience, whether it was a flood or something sunk, and it was due to the fact that there had been some, tectonic crisis that these people were experiencing. There was this one outpost left of Atlantis, and it was in South Africa. This is what was part of the information. And again, this is really out there stuff, but maybe you can embrace the potential of it here. So in this material, the first creator god of Atlantis was theoretically Lucifer, who was a half brother of Yahweh. And you see these half brother stories that come back again and again and again through creation myths and tales, like Enki and Lenlo. They weren't brothers; they were half brothers. Thor and Loki, they're half brothers, right? So it comes up again in this guy's telling of this sort of channeled work. And so theoretically, this Lucifer character, who is part Orion and part Syrian, leaves, and then these people who are in this outpost in South Africa are freaked out because the other part of their world, their civilization, has completely collapsed. And so then they get into this kind of telepathic connection with, because they're trying to call on, their creator God. And then what happens is that the Orions show up. They actually show up in that area. And then they say, okay, well, we'll take care of you. We'll show you a few things. And, you're going to be the caretaker race from this point forward. And so I brought that up with Michael a long time ago, and he thought it was mildly interesting. And look, I'm not saying that there's a connection there, but I think it's interesting that based on that Orion kind of alignment, and that this guy comes up with this kind of channeled supposition that this is what was going on during that time. When you were there, you talked about anomalous experiences or strange things. Did you have any what we call UFO or close encounter activity while you were there?
Oh no, nothing there. But I have been at Big Rock in California, not too far from Joshua Tree. I was there for Contact in the Desert 2 years ago, and this was really interesting. Those triangle shaped UFOs that people see. They were flying in formation. There was actually 3 to 5, depending on. We watched for 3 hours.
Wow.
And so I have actually seen. Those are now being credited as they've been cited rising from Area 51.
Yeah, they seem like they're government craft.
Yeah. But now I have very limited experience in the air. I have 6 hours flying.
Mm-hmm.
So I am fascinated by flight, but in my eye, I watched what I thought was multiple vessels. I watched one just kind of like the Tic Tac deal,
Mm-hmm.
where one's in one location and in a blink of the eye, it was 20 miles from the group and then back.
Yeah.
And at first I'm like, okay, there's like 7 and one's turning off their lights and it looks like it's traveling. But I observed it for 3 hours. It was actually the single vessel and the way they moved, that, no left turn, no right turn, that I was watching UFOs and I'm like, okay, now this is a normal thing. Apparently I have now witnessed UFOs. And then Contact in the Desert last year is where I got to work for a few days with Alex Hoffman, who owns Hoffman Optics.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people know he supplies the night vision goggles to Camp Pendleton and other military bases. These are military grade night vision goggles. And I helped put 500 people through wearing them at the actual event.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't take you long if you've never used them to look up and go, it's not a moth, it's not a bat, it's not an eagle, it's not a satellite, it's not a plane. When you eliminate all that, you will see that there is a very active night sky, that at all times, beyond military, including military UFOs, military technology, anti-gravity likely driven. There's definitely a military class of vehicles that are way beyond our understanding. But then there are also like the Tic Tac and other sightings by plenty of credible people of vehicles that are flying around. And this ties into a part of the question that you were kind of tabling for the Anunnaki and our history of our planet. The weirdest thing I found, and the reason that this all ties in, is that outside of military UFOs, the UFOs that we do see, the first assumption is, well, these post-flood, these antediluvian stories of the Anunnaki and the gods and the Christian stories and or any religious corporate stories, is that we basically have this story we're told by mainstream academia that, well, we were all banging rocks and in loincloths, and then this timeline happened. And then, well, since Eric von Daniken and Zachariah Stitchin, there's been people who have now imagined, well, when you look at these buildings, these giant megalithic structures and these different finds that we find, whether it's South Africa or South America or Egypt, we look at it now and we go, well, there's no way we did this without the help of aliens. And so based on our general age group, to out myself, the reality is that it's easy to go, it's aliens versus it is to say, we at a prior epoch in history, technologically as humans, advanced so far that the ships that we're seeing are more likely a survivor race of humans than it is to template a story that says, well, we have this mythology of Sumer and we've translated a lot, and they have these stories of Gilgamesh and the Anunnaki and Enlil and all these different stories of how, well, to be short. So they had the ability to come from a binary star system and control interstellar space and program mitochondrial DNA, but they didn't have the ability to create a 3D atomic printer to make gold for their world.
Mm-hmm.
And that story that we templated starts to fall apart about how we relate to our past. And to bring you back to the very beginning of why I wrote my book is that I found, I did not find it, but there's a history of engineered soil all over the earth. And that's in Brazil, it's called terra preta. This is soil that isn't made from decomposition or just like, well, you burned a bunch of trees down and a bunch of dinosaurs got cut. This is the richest soil on earth and the identical recipe. It's called terra preta, and it is by 100 times the best growing soil on earth. But it also filters heavy metals, filters fertilizers, has piezoelectric properties, and is found in northern Africa and Australia. At the start of my book, the next thing I know, I'm finding from Siberia to Eastern Europe to America, there's also another kind of engineered soil called Chernozems. These are not naturally occurring, and they are in areas that are supposed to have been nomadic people, just like Göbekli Tepe was not supposed to exist. And so what I began and ultimately over 3.5 year journey deconstructing on a daily basis is that we have a group of humans that not only could engineer soil for growing and for electromagnetic properties for connecting of the very megalithic buildings that are made out of polygonal blocks that are actually able to cancel earthquakes, to stone spheres, which recent papers that I was able to include in my book last year show that this is a society of humans that not only could genetically manipulate things like take the Paracas of Peru, these elongated skulled alien looking people, but really they show at least possibly 6 DNA points that are not known to humanity. Yet Denisovan and Neanderthal and the other strain of humanities, we're just starting to understand as we currently in the last 40 years, we discover 5,000 creatures a year on average. So yeah, a lot of that's fungus and bacteria, but we didn't know really consciously as a public. Peter Wohlhollen's book, The Secret Life of Trees, realized that there is a connective fungi and the root systems of interspecies of trees. They actually connect together, they communicate, they feed. But we assume that this natural environment is natural. When I started looking at engineered soil, and not just the anomalous ruins, whether it's South Africa or this Guatemalan LiDAR scans of 50,000, 60,000 buildings with these mile-long, super straight, raised superhighways, representing now to archaeologists that they said we have to admit that we've grossly underestimated the populations in ancient times in South America. And now they've even been able to say publicly, even through National Geographic, well, there was at least 15 or 20 million people. And that's from a LiDAR scan in Guatemala. That's Central America. And the LiDAR scan is scheduled. They're still working on it. And it's supposed to be 5,000 square miles. And they established a change in South America. We got to think about this. Central and South American populations have been reestablished to over 20 million based on 800 square miles of LiDAR scanning. So the snapshot, we have to tear away these stories, whether it's alternative history or whether it's the mainstream. And instead of tabling the theories and trying to take facts and go, well, look, there's a story of the Anunnaki from Sumer, and there's all these gold mines, and so their story must be true. And let's build this narrative based on this mythology. Let's strip away and take the slivers of truths like extended life. Like, what do we know about waves and frequencies? And well, we know that this society, at least one, in pre-flood, pre-12,600 year ago, Younger Dryas, which we're calling it now, and I think there's solid establishment for that. But clearly, based on the Anunnaki, the Sumerian kings list, there was 8 kings. But in the mythology of the kings list, which is found all over Sumer, it says, well, 8 kings each ruled for 36,000 years. Well, what if the truth of it, just like in the Bible, is that we did have the ability to kill cancer cells and MRSA and leukemia? Oh, exactly what Anthony Holland did in a TED Talk for everyone to watch. If you want to go search for that on the internet, you can watch Anthony Holland, what is actually a music professor, pick up Royal Rife's work, which was also based on the idea that humans probably could engineer not only their genes, not in some alchemy way where you drink an elixir and you suddenly have eternal life. Our genes, just like in the mythologies of the Anunnaki about programming and creating a slave species.
Mm-hmm.
The fact is that our genes are programmable, but it also means that they are a vibrating frequency, which Anthony Holland in 2008 had established could kill over 30 viruses, 30 bacteria. He could kill MRSA, he could kill leukemia and other cancers. And this is established science. So is there a time pre-flood and maybe a little post where we had very long lives because we had technology that we actually used, not unlike anything else now, where we have now decremented down and are almost in a safe mode where we're 10 to 15% conscious. And we're like, well, the theory of evolution says you get something through a forced adaptation. Well, wouldn't that mean that we used 100%, that pineal gland thing? Why do we have ocular nerves there? Why is it that we have these biblical stories that we talked with animals? Is it possible that from engineered soil, not just for growing and filtering the air, but the electromagnetic properties, that from the very giant megalithic structures to the engineered soil, through us, through the animals, and through these extended networks that we think are biological, not technical, but the reality is we look at technology as like the mics and the technology we're on now. We're not thinking that the actual biology is the technology and that really we're in like some giant crashed safe mode, because this ancient high-tech human society, clearly through natural and possibly weaponized disaster through war, destroyed themselves. And when they came back, or why they're here and what they're doing, is I think one of the biggest mysteries to table, because we're all seeing UFOs and they're not all military.
Right.
So are they from an interdimensional space traveling world because we're the most interesting planet in the galaxy? Or is it more likely that this group is an ancient high-tech human race that's still here? But we put a lot of mythologies in front of us. We put a lot of lenses and filters before we stop and look at humans built these giant megalithic blocked wave frequency resonating, earthquake canceling. We built the Nazca lines, and I'm not talking the spiders and the giant dogs and who cares about. That's interesting. All periods of human history are interesting, but the base Nazca lines, according to Eric von Daniken, who I got to meet and talk to about this, they're treated in arsenic. Again, they have electromagnetic properties and they look like giant earth circuits. Like they've even experimented with technology with Google now that tattoos have become actual circuits in the skin.
Right.
We're rediscovering technology that's already clearly in the ground, that there was a society that is using waves and frequencies on a level that requires machining. I mean, if you're going to build a building, and then we haven't even discussed foundations yet of this engineered soil. It's called seismic metastructures, which means it can be nanotechnology. So the very waves and frequencies could be hitting a really, really small item that is part of a
Looks like.
Oh, did you get me back?
Yeah, you're here. Yes, back.
Yeah. All right, cool. Yep. But that's the issue, is that from the construction of these buildings, it would require you to say, well, we know that earthquakes and plates, and they shift at X point underground and so many miles that way, that if we build this megalithic building at Sacsayhuaman or Ollantaytambo or Tiwanaku, that this megalithic giant 800, 1,000, 3,000 ton structure that fits together perfectly, because it will cancel not only earthquakes, but it's always made out of a high crystalline content that likely we can measure the location of the disaster. Plus, we live tens of thousands of years, just like the Hindu Vedas and all the scriptures in the East, which there's this divide between the East and the West. It's like we think the greatest, the bee's knees is all of the Fertile Crescent. And we, as Westerners, we start with this paradigm of Garden of Eden, out of Africa. We have to like drop that and look at the full globe and look at, why are there megalithic constructions on every part of the planet? Why is there engineered soil on every continent? Why are there stone spheres everywhere? And how does that look against people like the Paracas that are born with a different suture line, that have a neck that goes in the back of the head instead of the middle, that have different foramen magnum where the arteries go into the head. These are genetically different humans that are found all over the earth, from Egypt, Bosnia. They're found everywhere. And yet these are the big elephants in the room, and we jump. I'll get off my soapbox, but we get off on these, we get caught up in this romantic idea of, well, we have this mythology, fill in the blank, whether it's Christian, or whether it's the Sumerian, or whether it's some Eastern Indian, but we haven't really admitted enough to table the facts instead of the theories. Let's table all the out of place, out of time artifacts. Let's table all these genetic anomalies. You can't call them anomalies. They're actual there. Why is it that we all have genetic memories? To your point, why do people go places and experience? I feel like I've been here. A lot of people claim that they were Cleopatra or Mark. There are always somebody famous.
There's always somebody famous. I know, right? Yeah.
Yeah. They're never Bill the crap keeper.
They weren't the fishmonger down by the docks.
Yeah. And then, but then there are people who have not second sight, but there are people who work with people who do have the ability to actually. They have said, I was on a farm, and they describe it. It's someplace they've never been. And people go digging, and they find that, wow, there really was a farm here. And it really was, it wasn't a corn farm. It was a dairy farm, or, they do find. So I think there's that idea of a collective human consciousness where there's a possibility that you're talking about remembering what could be a collective genetic memory, that that you and I are each other's backups, that the idea that maybe the idea of the sliver of truth in, for instance, reincarnation, is that we carry genetic memories of all human beings. So not that you would make a copy of yourself, but that collective human consciousness is something we draw on, like the available RAM on the planet. Now that we're at 8 billion people, like but
do we really have 8 billion people? I mean, that's another thing.
Yeah.
That we gotta like.
Oh yeah.
Where's that figure coming from?
Right, and then I think, and I look, Michael Tellinger made a great point about this. He's like, let's just round up. Allegedly it's 7.6, right? And we're supposed to hit 8 by, I don't know, whatever the numbers, and who's ever coming up with the numbers.
Whoever's coming up with the numbers, right? And are all those people accessible at any given time? And how do you define a person at that level too, right?
Right. And let's just say, for all the people who are doom and gloom, that there was what I've learned, and there is tons of scientific research and papers on this. Soil scientists really do exist that have tried to figure out. It's called biochar. The modern term for engineered soil is biochar. But Michael, so you have this really rich soil, and Michael came up with this point of take 8 billion, give them all an acre. Do you know that every person on Earth could have an acre and fit in 2 states the size of Texas?
Right. Yeah.
So the whole planet, it's not an issue of sustainability, but take Leonardo da Vinci. Let's just say the populations were only 100 million, right? What I was going to get to on the collective human RAM, the collective consciousness, even though da Vinci was brilliant, he came up with things that were made out of wood. Like, I'm going to make a plane. It's going to look like a Flappy Bird. It's not going to look like an F-15 Strike Eagle or an F-22, or it's not going to look like a stealth bomber. And he didn't think of a cell phone, but he kind of could go a little, the spectrum for his possibility of thinking was X, Y, Z big.
Right.
But if you look at it in terms of population, I think something that could be a side value. I know we have an instinctive desire to value all human life, but then a lot of people look and they get very cynical and bitter, and they look at someone living in a very third world situation. And they go, those people are just starving. Well, we know they don't need to be. Why are they? And at the same time, well, I don't see a value in their lifestyle or what they do. But what if the part you're missing is that the reason we've reached the level of technology we have right now is because there is a collective human consciousness, and it's not just about genetic memory where you're recalling maybe either someone else's life or this stored memory. And by the way, I will bring this up. The reason I'm saying that is because Harvard scientists in 2008 took a 50,000 word book using the 4 different letters. They turned them into ones and zeros, and they imprinted a 50,000 word book. Today, 12 years later, they did it on DNA. Right now, a gram of cellular material can hold over a terabyte of information.
Wow.
You could basically take everything humans know and put it in 2 elephants.
Wow.
And you won't have to think about it. So they would carry it, and as long as those elephants keep having babies, that information's never going to go away. And that's a study, and that's a thing that we're rediscovering along with nanotechnology, where again, it's where you can kind of tell where someone's at with their own personal experience in this rediscovery when they say, yeah, aliens had to come to Earth. They could travel through interdimensional space, but they didn't know how to work out a 3D atomic printer, and they needed to mine something. Well, if they, no, it doesn't work like that, because we know now, because we print hearts, we print livers, we know that you can grab any element and you can print it. And we even have, even by 2008, Ray Kurzweil, The Singularity is Near, incredible, relevant book where you have 100 pages, by the way. Personally, I'm not an economics model fan. You could skip the justification for it, but his whole argument about looking at all the technologies, including wirelessly controlled nanobots that can enter a single layer cell and fix DNA, because it's a nanobot that can also create nanofactories that can, imagine being injected, they travel through your system, they have nanofactories that can create more nanobots or solutions, and they can do everything at the mitochondrial
but will
level.
they be unionized though? That's what I want to know.
Exactly, because they're not working Sunday, because the 7th day we rested.
Right.
And,
so okay, so you've just unpacked a lot. Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Sorry. It's good. It's a good unpack. So I want to go back to the idea of this the Anunnaki, or the the creator race, or whatever you want to call it. So I think you bring up some really good points. Now, I will say that, let me just throw this out there, and I'm sure somebody has already asked you this question anyway, but I'll throw it out there anyway. So let's just say, for instance, that the Anunnaki or whomever come from a place that is not third density, that they come from a place where even if they had the printer, that they could not actually print gold because they came from a different sort of density level. They didn't have the elements there to do that. So here, because it is third density, they actually have the ability to get into the earth and mine this stuff. Now you could say, well, how do they get there? How do they get here, and how do they adapt to third density if they don't have it? Now, I don't have an answer for that, but perhaps that is a reason why, if you want to be able to kind of extrapolate. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, this goes back to that. I knew this was going to be a hard, heavy paradigm shift.
Well, it's not that hard or heavy. I mean, I can embrace it. I can wrap my head around it. But
not that. Yeah, I totally agree. No, we're tracking. We're on the same page. I knew that when I would get into this, that the difficulty is that the craft. Okay, so I talk about this. I have a chapter in my book about the astronomy and the serious astrophysics behind establishing that a Nibiru, that a planet that they may have been from, that it is very clear that we are unique in the universe in that we only have one sun. And it appears that anywhere that we've looked, and something to distinguish for people who don't know, when we look out into the universe, they think of the Hubble telescope, that we take this very fine, articulate, high definition picture, and then we have this pretty picture, and that we zoom in and we see a planet or star. Most of our long range views come from radio telescopes. So when you look at a picture, when NASA says, hey, we discovered this thing, you're going to see a little thing usually in the bottom of a picture with a NASA article, and it'll say artist rendition, because the radio frequencies are sent out, but we don't actually have a visual photo. And how this is relevant to the Anunnaki and Nibiru is that what we have found in the universe is that anywhere we think there's a planet that's just about the right depth to a star that would say, hey, they could sustain life, what was been noticed, because they're so far away, is that, oh wow, it's a binary star system. It has two suns.
Mhm.
So we would be unique based on observations that we've made, although only, electro wave, we're not talking visual mostly. But what we are saying is that there is a good possibility based on astrophysicists, very, very current research, that there's a pull on our known solar system that is very easily explainable and looks like the most reasonable one, that there could be that we are a binary star system with a second star that we have not seen, which sounds weird, and I'll get to that in a second. And that Nibiru, let's just say that based on the Anunnaki mythology, came from what could be a high level of technology that allowed them to travel. Maybe the trip was 5 or 8 or 10 years.
Mhm.
So maybe they came from a planet, to your point about mining gold, that was within a distance that was within a lifetime, that you could maybe get here and go back and lose a third of your life, or maybe they did live longer and it really wasn't a big deal to spend 5 or 10 years in space to get to this planet and mine gold. But no matter what, I'm a big fan of aeroponics. So this is where NASA developed, if we're going to go to Mars, and they developed this in the 70s. They said, can we grow plants without soil? And I'm a huge proponent of this because it allows you to create a nutrient base of 50 plus minerals that right now farmers, I'm in Minnesota, so a lot of farms. My dad's family were farmers, and and biochars, like modern biochars, those exist. So they put these things in the soil, but they only put in about 16, 17, 18 minerals. It's not like a potting soil that has more, but NASA thought, well, if we're going to fly through space, we can't have too much water and we can't do obviously a crap load of soil. How are we going to sustain this? Well, if you create a nutrient base in water and then atomize the water to 30 to 50 microns, which is kind of like those misters when you're out on a hot patio and they have those misters up. Those
Mhm.
are point, those are 0.3 to 0.5 micron misters. And that's why it hits you and you immediately, it dries off and you feel cool. Well, this is what they're shooting directly to the seed.
Mhm.
And then the seed grows and then you have the roots and you don't have any soil and you can grow this plant. Why? For a long voyage. So even if it was hard packed meals and you're basically the technology to get from, even if Nibiru is in a 3500 to that, so that there are
So are you
two.
basing this on like jet propulsion technology? I mean,
Well,
what's your standard?
so what I'm saying, yeah. So what we're trying to do is like, I want to answer the question of why would the Anunnaki or anyone, why would any interdimensional and or interplanetary traveling advanced species, why would they come here to mine a physical mineral?
Mhm.
And what lowest level of technology would require such a feat? Like how low of a technology would you need to be, but still be
Right.
able to make the travel here and then go, okay, well, so the truth of it would be, okay, they have this ability to sustain themselves in flight. They're doing a sublight speed. They're not folding space. They're just traveling from a planet that we know is somewhere between we know that if Nibiru exists as the pull of the gravitation on our solar system shows, it's between a 3,500 and 15,000 year elliptical cycle. So at some point, it must come close enough where the travel might be
Right.
reasonable, right?
Yep.
So they get here, and here's my further opinion on it. They get here, they don't know how to manage the atomic structure. Look, it's just atoms. I
Mhm.
know that sounds silly, but that's what it is now. We have the ability to take this atom and make this. What we are doing now in quantum computing, I keep up on graphene conductors, what we're doing with non-moving parts, what we're doing with the understanding of electromagnetism. I think Ken Wheeler's work is insanely cool. It took me, honestly, hours to understand it. At first, I thought he was just crazy, but to understand what we know about nanostructures is significant. Like theoretically, we are close to, like, we can take almost any atom and make anything we want. So now we have to go to a group of people that come to this planet on the lowest level of propulsion technology, yet they have the ability to manage DNA, in such a fine-tuned way that they can program to rise up or from scratch create a race to enslave, to mine gold.
Mhm.
You have to take a lot of technological leaps to think that they can do that, but not just print or create gold. I'm saying print because people understand 3D
Right,
printers.
right. So
But yeah,
I think that here's the inconsistency that I see. It's not the fact that they would come here to theoretically get gold, because I think that this could be a very different kind of environment, made up of very different kinds of minerals in some ways, right? And that maybe they just didn't have the, I don't know, the subatomic structure or how to figure out how to do that theoretically in Nibiru. But here's where I have the issue, is that they get here, if they had the technology to get here, why didn't they have the technology to just mine the gold very easily? I mean, that to me,
right.
I think is the bigger piece.
Oh my God. Better played, sir. I have not
Yeah.
actually. That's actually, I skip right past that because
Yeah.
people are so into the fact that they created a slave race. I
Yeah.
never stop. And I go right to the 3D printer, but
Yeah.
that's brilliant. That's
Because that's always been my
brilliant.
issue with the story. It's like, well, if they could do all this, why would they need slaves?
Yeah.
They could just
Yeah.
figure it out and go in there and melt shit away and bring it out, right?
Yeah, well, even the most minimum propulsion technology, like the aeroponics required to feed yourself in space, no matter what kind of plant you eat,
Yeah.
some kind of that technology to atomize water, even, and just to, well, people think, oh, it's just a tiny spray nozzle. No, it took a little more engineering than that, and to get here on a short journey on the short side of the elliptical orbit to get to land here and then do that work. Yeah, mechanically, the technology, it would be easier for you to build a foundry and build all the equipment. And, well, you would just, and again, I think part of it is the alchemy idea. We have this really entrenched mysticism from the Middle Ages and prior that, hocus pocus. It's again misidentified, I think, nanotechnology that now it's it's a recipe and you say the magic words. Well, there's frequencies and there's waves that obviously have certain effects. That's why we have the study of cymatics. But it's likely that what looks like a magical process is just really some either nanotechnology, a waiver, like a garage door opener would be mind blowing in the Middle Ages. But the idea that you can drink an elixir and you could deliver a nanobot via, or something to program with a code to enter DNA, like a viral delivery. That's the point, to deliver into a piece of a cell to change mitochondrial programming. But it's not a matter of, well, if we have a mystical amount of gold in the air, everything sparkles right. I mean, that's a real 1950s saucer landed, okay. I get it. I get the romance in it, but
Mhm.
it's a very dated way to look at it. I hate to say it that way, but I think that's as politely as I can put it. I mean, it's just, we have that memory, it's great. It's like, yeah, people need to come here. They need silver. They need platinum. I don't know.
They need
It's just,
women.
yeah.
They need women.
You can
Uh,
never get enough of those around. I mean, you've seen the cantina on Star Wars. You need a variety.
right, exactly. Let's talk about the so-called advanced race, which is theoretically us. Did you ever get into Mac Tani's work at all?
No.
So he was really interesting. He was kicking around right around, I think, 2006, 2007, and he was writing these like kind of Mars Chronicle books, but he was really into the idea of cryptoterrestrials, and which is kind of what you're talking about, that there would be this advanced race that was already here, but they were actually inside the Earth itself. And I wanted to get your thoughts on the idea of cryptoterrestrials.
So there was just a news article on Live Science, or Science, not Science Daily. I think it was Live Science. And they referred to some researchers that actually did the most extensive seismic testing that shows a great number of spatial anomalies towards the Earth's mantle. I don't know if you saw that. It just came out a week ago.
No.
And so, are there large cavernous spaces? And have I talked to people about definitely artificial underground rock cut structures that had nothing to do with dynastic people? So Egyptians, Sumerians, old Olmec, Toltecs, Mayans, Aztecs. These are not post-Diluvian productions. These are ancient, thousands of years old cave structures that they look like caves now, but they were clearly rock cut. And is it possible that there is, for whatever happened? I mean, if we could do a whole show just on all the technology that we keep finding, like from Flinders Petrie and all the core samples and the cuts and the technology to create these large megalithic structures. But it's on every continent. So there was obviously this, for the quick point of getting to the underground structures, there was a worldwide culture that achieved a high level of technology. They either killed each other, killed themselves, and or natural disaster, or both. They retreat. Do they need sun like us? Probably not. If you have control over your genome, could you create, like we go in for plastic surgery? If you were going to do a 0-point turn Mach 30 spacecraft and you wanted to actually see the controls via an ocular, direct mind conscious control, would it be simpler if you were smaller, translucent, gray with dark, giant black eyes? Are you an alien? Or are you just a modified human? So over hundreds or thousands of years of disaster time, is it clearly possible? Is it obvious that people that were not in that group, like we have 150 tribes around the planet right now that we leave alone? Like right now, they live in the deserts, they live in the Arctic regions, they live in jungles, they wear loincloths, they wear nothing. They're there, but we don't go pull them out and say, here's your cell phone and here's a Jeep.
Right. Here's a mask and we'd like to contact trace you.
Yeah, no kidding, right? And so now it's like, okay, well, so some disaster happens. These people get underground and they decide, okay, we can't come out, or we can, but during that period, well, look what happened to the Greeks. I mean, the Temple of Delphi is my screensaver, and it's polygonal blocks on the base. And Eric von Daniken did a book recently about re-looking at what the Greeks even told visitors. They said, the gods built this, just like the Aztecs told the Spanish. They said, well, we didn't build this, the gods built this, and then they built on top of it.
Right.
So, and again, you have these polygonal blocks. So it's like, well, who the hell was there first? What does that mean? Well, it means the Etruscans, i.e. the Greeks, i.e. Tartaria, this whole empire came before that. And then so did the dynastic Egyptians. And before the dynastic Egyptians, the Kemet societies have looked at the pre-Egyptian cultures, and the Incas, same deal. It's like, clearly these advanced megalithic structures, which, mind you, we have no finished materials. So when we look at these, the template is, well, they knew how to move really heavy blocks, cut them on 30 sides, razor thin, perfectly set together, bring them thousands of miles, and sometimes vertically 2 miles in the air, or 3, from the quarries, hundreds or thousands of miles away. And then they don't know how to put on finished material like plaster and wood. All we have left are the megalithic structures, right? But clearly, the time that they spent abandoned, we see, like in dynastic Egypt, temples that have keystone cuts, which is where there's these metal connecting points between these large high crystalline blocks of rose granite or basalt or whatever. And what you'll see in a new temple that the dynastic Egyptians have been building and remodeling, well, they've taken something that was once flat and they've turned it, and then they built it in 2 different courses, but you can see the connecting points where they should have gone together, but now they're in different rows within the same structure. Right. And that's a good example where I think they did go underground, and I do think it's easy to hide. One of the things I point out is Hyperion. It's a tree that we found that National Geographic did a story on. It's a redwood that is 379 feet tall and over 60 feet in diameter. It's incredible. And when you see a picture of Hyperion, it's in a forest, and you're like, well, the tree the tree looks pretty big, but boy, there's a lot of short trees around it. Those short trees around it are 100-foot pines. And here's Hyperion that we didn't notice, a 380-foot tree, despite all of our logging in a virgin forest, that this one tree is 380 feet tall. and we didn't notice it till 2008. And then we have the example, the
How can we
danger.
not notice until 2008?
I know. And then
So
and
what
then,
is it? I mean, were we not visually able to see it? Was it out of our purview?
oh
Was
yeah,
it
look it up. Look up Hyperion,
okay?
the tree. And then same thing with the Danger Islands. I mean, there's only a few research groups in Antarctica, and the Danger Islands are part of Antarctica. They started. They're kind of a peninsula, but they're a series of islands. And everybody loves penguins, right? I don't know if you recall, 2 years ago, they found a super colony via satellite of, dressed up in their finest black and whites, a super colony of between, they estimate, between, I think they just stopped counting. They said between 1.2 and 1.6 million penguins that they never noticed. It's not like they switched venues. It's not like it was a corona restriction.
Right.
We didn't notice that till 2 years ago, despite all the scientific teams and all the tomfoolery and shenanigans going on in Antarctica, irrelevant to drilling and biological and core sampling and the other weird stuff like Admiral Byrd. But there's a whole super colony of penguins that no one noticed till 2 years ago.
Mhm.
And so these are just two examples of how hard would it be to either live underground, live underwater, or we think it's like an impossibility. And we constantly, there's every mainstream show that when we start talking about the next time we go underwater for a maritime archaeology is incredibly difficult, really scary as far as the dangers involved. But we don't have the coastlines, even just till recently. So the first thing they say is, we know more about the stars than we do about underwater. Okay, well, and then you wonder where 20, 30, 50, 100,000 highly advanced humans would go with
Mhm.
impunity as
Mhm.
far as like their ability to travel. And we have the US military. I mean, here's the one thing. It's like, well, maybe it's all military. Well, why would the military? They don't mess around. And last summer, when they finally came out and said, hey, we've had a secret program for 70 years and we need the public's help to look for UFOs. Okay. Well, I think that's kind of that's not a joke. It's not like they're saying that we're in control of all of it and nudge nudge, we know that you know about our anti-gravity machines. There's clearly another group that has been here, is still here, and at some point in antiquity they came back and Egypt had been overrun. The Greeks had been overrun. The Harappan were gone, or whatever was there, or they came next. And then came India. And then you have the Incas adapting these large megalithic structures all over South America. And then Central America, again, the Olmecs and Toltecs and the Mayans all adapting and rebuilding giant megalithic structures that were clearly not built by any technology in a
Right.
post-Diluvian
Right.
world.
Right. John Levy gets into this when he plays around with, looking at these various kinds of strata of, well, this is visible to us. We can see, like, this is the remains of a building that was at the San Francisco World's Fair, right? That's visible. But then there are other structures that are less visible and seeming to be much older in some ways. And it's as if this history has been stacked on top of one another, right? We're dealing with
Yep.
almost like a layer cake
Yep.
of our history here, and that makes a lot of sense because they would come into these areas and they would be sort of the inheritors of what was previously there, and then kind of
Yeah.
build out around that stuff. I'm sure you're familiar. I mean, I wouldn't call John like a hardcore researcher or scientist. He's more of a kind of a social spelunker. I mean, he's interesting and he puts a lot of things together, right?
I like that.
Yeah. So
Social spelunker.
yeah,
All right.
but I like what he does. He opens up a lot of possibilities. And the one thing that really grabbed me was when, and this is pretty much I think baseline sort of technology for what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So when you zoom out, you can look at these layouts and these grids, and you can see that they're not just roads or they're not just like subdivisions.
Yeah.
That they're actually part of a almost like a blueprint or like a layout that does have the ability to either transfer energy or perform multiple functions. So where in your research, besides the lines in Nazca with the arsenic and stuff, where in your research have you seen more examples of these grids, which are almost like these electrical sorts of, I don't know.
Yeah, look up.
Yeah.
I think the best way for people to go look, just go to an internet search engine and go for Bolivian. It's so stupid. They call them all Nazca lines.
Yeah.
So go for the Bolivian Nazca lines, the Jordan Nazca lines, do Russian Nazca lines, and you'll find that there are different. Same deal. It looks like giant Earth circuits,
Earth
and
circuits. Thank
and
you. Yes.
and yeah, and so the other thing is the engineered soil like terra preta or Chernozem's. What's interesting about this is that what I think on the future that is on the horizon is more nano archaeology, where you're looking at what's nothing left but you'd think, okay, well, you can't rebuild something. Like, how small of a piece of a building can you get to and piece it back together?
Mhm.
And I think that we're going to get better and better at, because take a site like Tiwanaku, which is super famous for the H blocks and, well, the fact that it's very anomalous. It's been on a ton of shows and it's near, well, it doesn't matter. Sacsayhuaman, all of them. But take Tiwanaku, where you have a site, including Egypt or the Great Pyramid. Both sites contain large megalithic blocks that were adapted by local cultures and turned into a hut, or turned into a small 2-room home or a 3-room, or into another building or a palace. Like the casing stones, quite a bit of the pyramid, the casing stones are gone. It's the same thing at Tiwanaku, where even if you look at late 1800s photos of Tiwanaku, you'll see that they were making notes that the locals were still coming and quarrying out blocks. So you have damage and reuse being done on a site that has these incredible high technologies in their constructions. It's not just taking a 150-ton piece of one beautiful construction and transporting it, 300 miles over and 2 miles to 13,000 feet. It's not just that. It's the actual, this engineered soil has a property to it where I have 20 years in restoration remodeling in period homes, which is a joke at 120 years. I just did a remodel in an 1869, and that's old, but not thousands of years old, where you have these megalithic sites where they're not falling down, and they're not, now some like Machu Picchu, the lower sections that are megalithic and advanced, there's been enough earthquakes and no maintenance where some of the polygonal blocks have jumped out now. But that's no maintenance for maybe 4 or 5 or 6,000 years or more. That's dynastically, right?
Right.
And so what's more important about the technology, and I want people to think about this because no one's done it, is that not only do you have to start explaining 20 feet thick, terra preta in Brazil alone is, from what they estimate, at least the area of 2 Spains. That's how much terra preta is okay, and you have to make it. And it's in areas that are considered jungle. No one's supposed to need that much engineered soil. And in some places it's 20 feet thick. But what you have to account for, myself as someone who's been in construction and dealt with structural engineering and doing additions and doing and tying into something that's been already modified over 100 years by experts and laymen. And when I look at these constructions and I think foundations, here's something that's really exciting. We're not talking about sexy mummies and stuff and Indiana Jones. Now we're talking about sexy soil. And that soil, for the same technology that you need in order to build those crazy polygonal blocks, to put the stress points in a structure, and we don't have the wood anymore because we don't know if those buildings were 10 stories tall, and we're just looking at the base foundations like at Sacsayhuaman. And so the idea is, what if under the foundations, the engineering of the actual, when you build a home right now, it's supposed to be, the foundation is around the entire home, but it's just the foundation, and it's supposed to be pre-compacted to 90%. What does that mean? Well, they dig a hole, and whether it's clay or sand or whatever you're building on, they first dig a hole and then they pre-compact the whatever's there. And it's a little 80-pound gas-powered hand tamper, and it goes along. And then you put in class 5, which is your average gravel road. And then you pre-compact that. But you only go from a foot to about a few inches. You put some more sand and gravel, and you pre-compact. It's supposed to be 90%. And then you build a home, and anywhere from 20 years to 120 years later, I'm standing in your home, and you can just throw marbles and they'll go every which direction. It's a fun factor. But how is it that these constructions, something that's never been done, is that when you look at what's under these megalithic blocks, because some of them, like at Baalbek and at Sacsayhuaman, all these places we're talking about, these foundational blocks are 8 feet, 12 feet. That we're talking the width and the length. So the foundation, it's not, well, they're heavy. Well, it doesn't matter. It's like ice. I live in Minnesota. It doesn't matter how heavy your truck is. It will slide. It doesn't matter how heavy the block is. If it's not sitting directly on a bedrock, it's going to move.
Right.
So what is it that they're building on? And how, not only whether it is pre-compacted, because I'm working with an archaeologist right now. We're planning an expedition. The issue is, how pre-compacted is it? Because we're supposed to go to 90%, and I'll tell you right now, most contractors don't. They don't even know what that is. They pre-compact it to a point. They either build with cinder block or they pour a concrete wall. It's pre-compacted, but there's no core sampling. They're not really judging. But the next thing is, what if in seismic metamaterial, in seismic metastructures, that they're doing nanobits? What if, just like the stones are coming from 1,000 miles away or 500 miles away, what if the actual crushed material that makes up the actual foundational wall of these megalithic stone structures also has piezoelectric properties, but could be artificial nanostructures? It could be a combination of, like, what if it's a certain crushed crystal that only comes from China, but it's a building in South America? What if the material, where we see similar construction, what if the foundational layers, what if they're not just 2 feet? What if the pre-compacted layers make up a complex set of materials, right down to nanostructures that are artificially created? And even if not, how is it that they haven't, like, gone like this over thousands of years, unless there's something special about the foundational material to begin with, which is really so not sexy? And I apologize.
No, that's okay. Natasha thought it was incredibly sexy.
Oh, great.
Yes. She said sexy soil, right up her alley. Well, no, I think it's interesting. It's very interesting in terms of, are there properties inside of that soil that make it do things that are just not really well known. I want to talk about a non-sexy subject, though.
Oh yeah.
And this has to do with, like, credibility. Not yours. You're great. Stitchen, whose research has often come under a great deal of scrutiny and criticism. So I really haven't bought into the Stitchen stories all that much, although I do find the Epic of Gilgamesh to be quite interesting, by the way. On itself, on the storyline of Epic of Gilgamesh, I think is quite. The thing about the Epic of Gilgamesh and the tale of these two brothers is that you can find the tale of two brothers cross-culturally. I mean, that is a fact. Right?
Popular mythology. We are storytellers.
Right. Whether it's a Hopang Loya or Pokang Loya from the Hopi tradition, or Abel and Cain, or Thor and Loki, or Enki and Enlil, the two brothers are always playing a role. So there has to be a there, I think, with the two brothers. Now, whether or not they're space gods, or whether they're two highly advanced beings from this realm who have a key role in developing culture, well, that's a whole other sort of rabbit hole to go down into. But the question is, why would Stitchen come up with this sort of interesting, semi-correct in terms of the linguistics and the interpretation, fantastical tale about Nibiru and the Anunnaki? What is he just spinning a yarn, and is he a P.T. Barnum character, or is there something else going on there?
I think that, so ironically, after all these months, he's only come up now in the last, like, 3 weeks with me. So this is really fun and interesting in that I tried to chase down his information. One, it's on the, all right. So on the most credible point is that if it wasn't for him, and if it wasn't for, and Eric von Daniken continues to do, I think, some really great work.
How old is Eric von Daniken, by the way?
Well, the last time I saw him, I thought he had just turned 86.
Because when I was a kid watching Chariots of the Gods on TV, I think Rod Serling might have been actually narrating that thing. He was older then, so he's 86 now.
Yeah, yes, he is, and he is just awesome. He's doing great, I think. I mean, I haven't seen him in over a year now,
So
but
von Daniken is evolving. Is that what you're saying? He's kind of evolving.
yeah, like
Yeah.
he's gonna enter the hollow earth and never come out.
Yeah.
But
Nice.
no, what I think Stitchin's work, the issue that I have is one, on one hand, okay, so there are millions. This is something for people to be aware of. There are millions of untranslated cuneiform tablets. It's not like they looked at a cuneiform tablet and went, "Oh, this one looks important. Let's just translate this one."
Mhm.
So to find anything of importance to begin with in cuneiform tablets, and mind you, I've read a lot of translations where it is exactly what they say. It's a list, it's a receipt, it's a quick edict from one mayor to a larger governing body, or a king down to a governing body. There's a lot of cuneiform tablets that are just very simple receipts, and then there is also important ones, and I talk about a couple in my book. One is the Babylonian Plimpton tablet, which shows the Pythagorean theorems. Basically, all the stuff we credit to Pythagoras, here it is basically in a teacher's tablet, and it's 1,000 years before Pythagoras.
Mhm.
And it's pretty clear that the Babylonian Plimpton tablet was a teacher's aid, is what the theory is, because it looks so like, hey, this is just a quick format for us to go over these methods. So it has a teacher's personality to the way it was put down in cuneiform.
Right.
There's another one. It's the YBR. I put it in my book and I can't remember the full name of it, but this one's important because it shows that the math that the Sumerians used, and this has to do with decrementing societies, about losing that memory of the high technology, going from being able to use a frequency and wave to embedding it or imprinting it on clothing, which ultimately becomes a style. So in this case, this cuneiform tablet actually shows a base 60, a geometrically base 60 math program. So it allows you to calculate in spherical space more accurately with this methodology of math. And this is in a cuneiform tablet. So that's really interesting for a society that was, at least based on measurements, building ziggurats that also used pi. That makes sense if you have a base 60 spherical base mass system. That makes sense. Now, Stitchin comes along and says, here's this story, this story, and this story. And I'm like, well, this is fascinating. Well, I have to chase this down. It's not like just look at it for a little bit. And I'll tell you a couple things. One is, first and foremost, if he hadn't done his work, I think that less people would be interested in all of this. So I think it's very important that he did that. However, damned if I could find the actual cuneiform tablets or his research material.
Right.
It does not exist.
Right.
So the truth is that anyone who is super excited about this Anunnaki mythology, and if you're basing it on Zechariah's work, you have to ask yourself, where did he get this info?
That's where the holes are.
Yeah, that's the problem with it. And I'm not. And again, there are lots of cuneiform tablets that we're still translating. There are actual sites if you want to learn. I can't. I don't. I would like to. I just don't have that kind of time. But you can actually go. There are public sites where they're like, "Hey, here's a tablet that hasn't been translated. Give it a shot." And so it's out there. There are many tablets that are probably telling crazy stories, and we just don't know it. They're not all going to be receipts for farm sales or for merchandise, but this is definitely one of those examples of, it has been so latched onto by the alternative world that his stories, unfortunately, the short is they should all be considered very suspect. And not because they're not fun to hear about, but they're where's the tablets? Why is it so hard? Show me the tablet. I might not be able to read it, but show me the material. And from other cuneiform experts that can read, what I found was a lot of, I mean, some of it ranged from disparaging to respectful, but it was, this is the translations of what Zechariah has done. Here's what I've read. Here's what this translation really means. Here's why it's inaccurate. And so I really don't think you can go down. And I know it's super exciting to think a god species, whatever, an alien, whatever, gods came, made monkeys into slaves. But that work, you have to believe it without any well, that's real interesting. But just like the Rosetta Stone, can you show me the tablets? Where are all the tablets?
Well, the same thing happens in the evolution story. Like, where's the intermediary species? It's
I
like
love that.
keep waiting.
Olaf Phillips, my publisher has a background in archaeology, anthropology, history. That it's actually what he went to school for. And we had this conversation actually yesterday on Conflict Radio. First time I've ever actually interviewed my own publisher, by the way.
Yeah.
So we're actually talking, and we got into it. And Mike, who hosts Conflict, he's like, "Yeah, you guys go at it about evolution." And we didn't. We got into a polite, not fight, just conversation where it's like, okay, look, Michael Cremo, Forbidden Archaeology, goes into 120 years of paleoanthropological finds that show anatomically correct humans in layers of earth that way blow out the theory of evolution. And we got into it about Lucy, Australopithecus.
Right.
We got into it about all of it. And the reality is that to become a fossil, the one thing we were agreeing on was that's an exception. To become a fossil is not the norm. We have a thing here in Minneapolis that hasn't been going on for months or maybe a year, is Cafe Scientifique. And it was this thing where we had a couple of the most famous dinosaur archaeologists that are out of the U of M here. They would host this. And one of the episodes, I'll never forget, this is live. You sit in an auditorium, and this was how to become a fossil. Like, could you with effort become a fossil? And it is no matter what, it is dumb luck. No matter what, it's dumb luck, because over millions of years, the earth just churns everything up. And so it's a good point about plastic, rocks. You wouldn't believe it. But then Olaf pointed out that you have crystalline objects. And I'm not talking about fast growing. We're talking geodes that take many, many, many thousands of years to form. And there's like the spark plug, not like the fast growing sedimentary. Like, there's some geological explanations for fast growing, like how did we find a hammer that's in 60 million years of dirt or rock? And the reality is that it was a fast growing sediment. And or again, we can grow crystals. You can buy a crystal growing kit, but there are examples of geodes with out of place, out of time artifacts, like the aluminum under in Europe, where you have this at a minimum 700-800 years aluminum part that on one hand they said, oh, it's a Messerschmitt part, but it was under a undisturbed mastodon that was 33,000 years old. And you have an aluminum part that is clearly from some sort of a vehicle or something. And the reality is, okay, well, that shouldn't be there. And these spark plugs and these other objects that are be found in geodes are not supposed to be here. And then you either have to chalk it up to, well, isn't that strange? To, well, I don't think we have our history right. And the reality is, again, it ties into Zachariah's work and these other people, where the minute you get off in this story of, well, we don't know the facts, but we do know that somewhere between the Pythagorean theorem, using pi, a base 60 form of math, apparently they just shrugged their shoulders and said, well, we think aliens need to come and enslave us and program our DNA.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You have to take a lot of things out of context to say that this is a reasonable jump to, well, this is the story of humanity. We were just trudging along, and we were either abducted, we were either kidnapped into an enslaved system, or we were just kind of slugging along, killing mastodons, banging rocks, and we were building big square things. And some aliens came along and said, hey, we really going to help you build bigger things, but we're going to give it these. It's such an archaic way to look at our history now. But we will drop a cell phone in a year after the new one comes out. Mm-hmm. Yet the baseline center for our understanding of archaeology is a theory by a bunch of Victorian dudes that didn't want women to vote. And we keep that as the baseline and try to dump every fact into this baseline, not the facts, the theories. So why don't we just stop telling each other these mystical stories? And again, if you want to go to Stonehenge and you want to worship the sun rising in the east or west, or whatever the hell your mythical story is that you want to, that you've been, look, if somebody's been a druid for 1,000 years and they have a ceremony and you've been I like to say that if you're going to do yoga at Chernobyl for 1,000 years, there's 1,000 years of history, and it's a thing. Humans have an ability to connect to that third consciousness and the collective, and we can make something mystical and beautiful, and it'll have a history, and we should learn about it. But 1,000 years from now, Chernobyl's still going to be a dead nuclear power plant. That's what it is. If you feel mystical and tingly and you're bringing something to it, it's the same thing at these other megalithic scientific sites. It's not that we don't have mystical points, but we have to drop these filters.
When you say mystical points, are you talking about like ley lines, mystical points? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, there's actual scientific there are magnetic anomalies that show like ley lines, like actual ley lines.
Mhm.
I'm saying that if you want to worship the summer solstice with a sundress and flowers in your hair, and you want to feel like it's this mystical Merlin, you want to throw out if you want to deify or mystify what is an ancient technological site, if you want to start calling, like, you don't call your cell phone sacred geometry, sacred math. The more labels you put on ancient sites, the harder it is to see it. And so the problem with like the mythologies of the Anunnaki, the problems with these slivers of truths and all these ancient the storylines, the folklore, is that we then put that filter on when we dig something up, and instead of just again starting with the actual finds.
Mhm.
And what, for instance, why am I the first guy? Well, and I hate saying that. I don't want to say that. But why, even though soil scientists have been trying to improve growing, and they've been aware of terra preta and other biochars that are ancient, very few, they'll say it's a mystery, but very few scientific papers will mention their ages, because it throws off the land bridge deal down to North America to create what is a crumbling house of cards for
Right.
the narrative for Central and South American society. Not to mention that we have these anomalous deserts, and we have the moon-eyed people, the stories of natives, the bloodlines that we've actually done genetic testing and shown. It's pretty clear the Phoenicians, i.e. Canaanites, i.e. at least the 13th tribe has been here from Israel. It's pretty clear we have genetic evidence for this, and yet we have the Smithsonian and the British Museum, and we can go down that whole rabbit hole of how it gets blurred. And I do think it's important for people to maintain their faiths and their belief systems, but I digressed into that because I think it's important to start really clearing the air of the stories that we got excited about because of Stitchin, and or fill in the blank, and stop relating to it from the Bible, and start, maybe, whether you, not about belief system, but take the Vedic literatures and look at those, and
Mhm.
look at our histories that, well, they got their history written down, and they're saying, well, we've actually been at this for millions of years. Well, maybe we should take a look at that. And not just what they believe, but what are we finding? Like, there is a whole city off the coast of Cuba that is 50,000 years old before it was above on land. It was
Mhm.
found during they were looking for Spanish galleons. It was found 15 years ago. It is a whole city. You can look it up, and it's off the west coast of Cuba, and it's at 2,300 feet deep to 2,400 feet deep. And it's a full-on pyramid city. It's not like they built it and said, we're ready for the flood. It's at least 50,000 years old. No matter if you, so there's a theory not only of plate tectonics, but of hydro, that at one point, a large amount of water was actually below the plates of the earth.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that's one of the theories for the quick rise and drop in certain sea levels. But Doggerland is frequently talked about. I think it's important as an example, because getting into the mysticism of the Stonehenge area and everything, is Doggerland is the land that was above water even 5,000 years ago to 18,000 years ago. This is mainstream science. Doggerland was everything from Scotland to France, was one giant country. They were not islands. It was one giant part of the continental Europe. And even 4 and 5, when the coastlines, millions of miles of land, it's not just lineal or a few hundred feet, like, oh yeah, well, some of Egypt is right off the coast. No. We're talking significant miles of engineered soil, megalithic structures, paleoanthropological evidence of humankind. We're on the if you told the entire of human history from American history of just from Ohio as a coastline to Nevada, what we'd have a very different history, and that's kind of what's happened is that we keep templating our view back when we have these giant, ancient, highly advanced megalithic structures and engineered soil all over the earth, where if we would just stop looking at the mythological stories, we would have some so there's some of it, and it's interesting to watch Doggerland there on your map of how it looks over the course of 16,000, 9,000, 8,000, 6,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And if those load, if you can grab another picture, there's a real famous there's one that's from National Geographic. It's a really great photo because the same thing happens. I took of the 3.5 years, like I had multiple things happening while I was writing my book. One was I worked with an incredible illustrator. Her primary function, besides being an illustrator, cartographer, her main thing is engineering and architecture internationally. And so my illustrator was somebody with a very analytical background. She lives in Germany, and I was able to get a map done. But of the map that I included in my book, it took 2 years to assemble. It's very hard to find maps that holistically. Oh yeah, if you want to find a map of Pangea and like a 100 million year timelines, you can find those maps all day long. But if you want to find Doggerland and just look at Doggerland, no problem. If you want to look at Indonesia or New Zealandia, there's even better. That's even a better map of Doggerland in Europe. And what are the stories we're missing from that land?
Right, exactly. Well, so the whole Stitchen thing, just to kind of put a wrap on that, is who was he, and why did he create that story, or why did he embellish the story? So here I'm going to throw this out there.
Yeah.
So there are people who would assign the value of a gatekeeper to Stitchen, right? That he would gatekeep certain information. Well, why is that? Well, is it because that the creation myth or the Bible story or the evolution tale, whatever those were, would lose steam at a certain point, and that they would need another narrative for people to kind of hook into and wrap their heads around to explain something that is continuing to take something away from this idea that we were beings at a certain point of our evolutionary arc that had gifts and abilities that set us apart. In essence, it takes us outside and away from ourselves again.
Yeah, I'm so there's actually, that question is awesome because in it there's really a whole show between antiquity theft and the idea that the middle title of my book, it's not aliens, worse, it's us. The idea that there is a advanced human culture. Are they helping us? Are they guiding us along? Is there conflict between them from the standpoint of why is it that we keep getting these little nudges? Like we make it back to North America and suddenly somebody magically shows up to a guy named Joseph Smith and says, hey, here's another narrative for the Christian story. But in that story, it's go look in South America. Go to South America. You guys still aren't looking at the Great Pyramid, but go dig up more stuff. Is it a positive guide? Is it a distraction? I think Stitchen straight up the short answer on, I think like standard academia, if you hoard an idea, there's a standard now that says if you discover something after 5 years, you have to share it. But I do mention some of this in my book. Dr. Melissa Selou talks about a professor she knew. She's an expert in Coptic Christian. Her alma mater was Macalester here in St. Paul, but she's also Harvard, and she's incredible expert. But she knows she outed one. She didn't say by whom, but she has a professor that kept a Dead Sea Scroll in his drawer to his own amusement, an original, for 40 years until he died. He just didn't want to share it. So Stitchen, in the same spirit, may have been holding on to information that might be legit, and it would have legitimized him further if he would have shared it earlier, or maybe not when he died, or maybe it was like, I'm not going to give up this research because I'm profiting from it and it's my bread and butter. I don't want to share an idea. But I would argue, in short, as we're kind of where we're at, I would say that genetic memory, when people go someplace and they have a strange feeling, whether it is Stonehenge, it's not that you shouldn't experience or feel something, but it could be you and I dialoguing right now. But there is genetic memory, and there is something, our whole history and our future is tied together for sure. And it's all of it shouldn't be just watching television at night and Netflix and chill. It should be that this dialogue, our conversation, the finds that we make, the words, the frequencies, the sound, the music we hear. I think we're all drawn to all these different things, not just because we like to tap our foot or think about or relax to it, but that we have deeply in safe mode, higher functioning abilities like controlling our immune system, and
Right.
that we haven't had. All of that has to do with genetic memory that we get triggered when we go on these trips and we go to Egypt and we go to the Machu Picchu and we go and we see Sumer and we look at some of these ziggurats and we go to Stonehenge and other henges. There is genetic memory because it is tied into something. And I think by not hoarding it, it would have triggered more memories and more abilities, and people would still have enjoyed Stitchin lectures. They still would have bought his books. And instead, we have this really nefarious history of really just a mythology that he added to. And in a lot of realms, as people go through these stages of discovering all this information, they hear about his stuff and they will run down the mythology and they'll tell you this great story like Thor. And it's a mythology, so which is great, but where are the slivers of truth? And if you start with a mythology that's literally been built around unfindable cuneiform tablets that no one else has seen, that sucks because it throws people off. But I don't think he was part of a greater organization. To what I've seen, he got on the right track at a moment, and he shared some really great I think the spectrum of ideas needed to be put out there. I think he needed to a point, a lot of what he did say was, I think, very helpful to everyone to just move forward this paradigm.
Right.
I think that part was important, but I wouldn't say, I don't personally think it was because he was really trying to be either manipulated, controlled, or that he was trying to be, I don't think he was trying to be mean or selfish or manipulative in a completely mean way. I don't think.
So, would you say he was self-interested on some level?
I
I mean,
think
we're all self-interested, but like a deep self-interest.
I think, like a lot of researchers, I think that archaeologists, I think a paradigm needs to shift. All archaeologists need to be paid to fail. They need to not be terrified that they're not going to be funded because they didn't find what they were supposed to find, or the facts don't find. They need to go out and be able to find what they find. Stitchin, I think, is definitely of a generation where you protected whatever you found. It was yours. It's bizarre. It's not your history. It's our history. Like, we should all have a library card to the Vatican Library. We should.
I agree with that.
That's and it's not just theirs. It's every university that's ever pillaged. I mean, there are 3 basalt. 3 of the, I don't know if you know this, but on Rapa Nui, on Easter Island, so there's about 1,000 moai, the big heads, and yes, some of them are full bodied. But when the British went there, what's really interesting, like, again, the decrementing of technology, there are 3 basalt, which of the 150 that are made of basalt, these are the hardest and the most complex and the most beautiful moai on the island. There's 150 of them that are made of basalt. Well, 3 of them got loaded onto ships and got sent to the British Museum, and they didn't check them out like a library. They just took them.
Right.
And so we have history in every back room of every filing cabinet, and just think Raiders of the Lost Ark and Ark of the Covenant. We have all these storerooms of our entire history and lost technology. And I'm not saying, hey, out there, the technology we need to find about our highly advanced human. There's 2 places to find that, starting with engineered soil and starting with the megalithic structures and their cymatic polygonal construction, reverse engineering that, and the fact that we literally have the Paracas, elongated skulled, differently made, genetically different humans. Literally, we just have to study them. And every other mummy that we could do DNA testing on, we need to start there. It would be great if in the backing museums there was more schist discs, like in Egypt, that disc that's made out of, it's incredible, this stone wheel. But it's the fact that it's our history and our shared memories. And whether it's because it's a lifetime you're in now, or it's something that you can tap into it possibly from that memory standpoint, I think it's important that we all have access to it.
Yeah.
And Stitchin's work was Stitchin's work, but dismantling it, to me at this point, not that that's what you're suggesting or anyone else is, I think his work is just, okay, he moved the ball forward more than he did back, but you really got to just discern his work and say, hey, look, this is a real cool story, but trying to template the facts into a story versus tabling the facts, his story is a cool story. It's just not close to what happened.
Right.
It just doesn't look like that. So for that arching story, and then it's been married so close to the Egyptian one that, oh yeah, the Anunnaki, and it happened exactly like this, and then it got connected, and they're the source of the Egyptian gods. Time out.
Mm-hmm.
What do we have written down beyond some third, fourth hand Greek, Herodotus, and a number of others that came to Egypt, and we have their secondhand stories about, you Greeks are old and you don't know how old you are. And we Egyptians actually have a king's list that goes back 36,000 years. I mean, I do think Egyptology needs to start taking that more seriously. Or there are king's lists that they're like, wow, they knew how to work with pi and spherical math, but shit, they don't know what a year is. So they didn't really mean that guy lived for 36,000 years. The Egyptians didn't really mean they had dynastic periods that long. Well, I'm pretty sure they did. They knew how to do anything else,
right?
But that's some of it, I guess. But
yeah, wow. So we started off in the kind of the vast expanse of South Africa.
Yeah,
and we started with a really big kind of macroscopic view, and working backwards a little bit. What about you? Let's hear a little bit about you and your background and how you got interested in this material. And were you just one of these little kids in nature that used to run around outside and play in the dirt and play with rocks and collect stuff?
To be, like when I was 5, it's like, I want to be an archaeologist.
Yeah.
And then I saw Star Wars and I'm like, I want to make movies.
Yeah.
But the archaeology thing, we're lucky, in the Twin Cities, we have the Science Museum, and here it's really good. And it's interesting because archaeology didn't start as archaeology. It started as art collection.
Mm-hmm.
A Victorian dude wanted to have a little statue on a mantle.
Right.
And so the goal wasn't figuring out our past. It was just find a cool statue. So the Minneapolis Institute of Art has a mummy, has an Egyptian collection, has Spartan helmets. And it was just so incredible to look at that. And as I got older, one of my heroes was my grandfather. My mom's dad was a tank commander in World War II. So he was in the 7th Armored, and he was actually in a tank from D-Day through Belgium and Holland, back to France for Battle of the Bulge, and all the way to Berlin in a tank. And so for me, I already had an interest in dinosaurs, and we looked at them whenever we could because our museum was free when I was young. And so we would go all the time. And then after that, we would do, I loved going to between doing the the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Science Museum, and looking at our past and our future, it was just hard to ever put it down. Like, I was transfixed by the patterns on some of the clothing. Like, why is it that these ancient Chinese clothings why is it that we had found the Om, the symbol for Om? Right. How did that get printed? And then we get back into cymatics, where we're putting different particles on metal and creating frequencies. And the picture of Om is identical to what Om looks like as you're vibrating a plate.
Right.
How did we know that unless it was part of a technology that we just forgot that we had? So I grew up constantly questioning, and it helps to be an Irish Catholic because you start either believing or questioning.
Right.
So I got that going for me too.
Yeah, that's great. I'm sorry, I had to throw this up here because chat is a fast moving river. Yes. And people were asking me to put this question out there to you before it went away. So this is our friend Steve. Yeah. Ask him about rebooting consciousness from genetic memory And if blanket vaccinations may be to permanently prevent that ability, Q,
Okay.
New archaeology is a rescue mission, not a research mission.
So, okay. Let's see. I wanted to make sure. I have another interview at 2, so I wanted to make sure.
Okay, you got a Reader's Digest encapsulation to this right now. Go.
Oh, that's just terrible. That just keeps people buying new subscriptions, right? So it's a great question. So we're 10 to 15% conscious.
Right.
So the idea is, why is it that we seem to have a capacity, a quickening right now? Why are there so many people not only just interested, but experiencing new kinds of, or rediscovering kinds of meditations that seem to activate a consciousness level where it goes beyond instinct or what maybe you'd call the paranormal? The idea is, because I guess part of his question is, yeah. So I think that in order for us to remember collectively, it requires an awareness of not just our past, but our future. So part of it is to say, okay, what if as we're remembering, as you're connecting back physically to this engineered soil, which has become all topsy-turvy. So it's the soil's missing. There were floods. There was disasters. There was weaponized disasters. We have these deserts all over that don't look like they should. Oh yeah, there's a jet stream. No, it appears that a lot of our deserting around the world look like it may have also been caused through maybe either, again, a catastrophe or a combination of that and disaster. So the ways that we physically connected to the earth, right down to those connective funguses, bacterias, piezoelectric soils, all of that combined with our consciousness, our pineal gland, the ability to actually see, hear, abilities like synesthesia. That's where this goes. Synesthesia, where
Right.
all of your senses are connected, where some of the abilities that even Aristotle, the Greeks were aware of it. They studied it. Carl Jung, modern psychology studies synesthesia, because it's an ability where there's dimensional versions where you can say to someone 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And literally in their mind's eye, they see a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, a 1, and it's visually on like a canvas in their mind. They're seeing the numbers, but also smelling can get inverted to seeing colors or vice versa, or numbers and patterns and firecracker geometric spacing. And what's important about synesthesia is that, like gigantism or dwarfism or something that we call a disability, may more be, as we understand genetics from going from no double helix to quad helix to what we know, that synesthesia and these different formations of the human body have maybe more to do with functionality, and also the ability that instead of us just mentally comprehending, for instance, as we become more conscious again, that if we had 20 or 30 or 40% consciousness and an ability like synesthesia, would you go to a megalithic construction site and would you have a plan and a drawing that you're about to cut a 30-sided polygonal cymatic block that fits X level at 300, 400 tons, and you have to make it fit and cut on every side, and your cutting frequency mechanical technology that you're about to do that with, is it really something that's going to be mapped out in a drawing? But let me give you a hypothetical that you threw on headphones, turned on your favorite music, and through music and sounds and frequencies, it projects through your own mind's eye a dimensional spatial point that places a giant, what is a square or round block, and what you see are colors. And just like Michelangelo cut the stone away from the David, you are given a polygonal block. And because of your connection with the soil and your inputs and your communication with others direct through your pineal gland and collective human consciousness and synesthesia, you're able to see that you have to carve away the purple. And then there's only orange now. And then there's red. And when you're done, you don't care about numbers. You're not looking at numbers. You've used a genetic programmed ability that has connected you to the building plan for this structure in a way that allowed you to take away the pieces that didn't belong and place it at the next level, because you have, through a collective consciousness and or connecting, this reawakening is something we're experiencing, allowing us to see these possibilities in the past and how these things were constructed. And I don't think they're unrelated. So in the idea of Steve's question moving forward, there are people like Wim Hof and Stig Severinsen he has breathology. Wim Hof is called the Iceman. I got to meet him the first time he came to America, and it's a practice where you do a breathing technique that connects you immediately. You're not it's not like yoga. You're not thinking about your problems on a cloud and they're floating. You don't have to tell yourself what to think. When you do this breathing technology, it is a technology because Wim holds 26 world records. One is running barefoot and in shorts and no shirt at 20 below zero for 26 miles and maintains his body temperature. He climbed Mount Everest in shorts. He's the first guy on earth to be proven to consciously control his immune system. What drug company wants you to consciously control your inflammatory response?
Right.
But he taught people this. I've learned how to do this. You can learn how to do this. Everyone can learn how to do this in about 15, 20 minutes. And that's one ability where we have shows now about superhumans. And the reality is Wim Hof is phenomenal in that if you ever hear him, and I know we're on a podcast, but I will abbreviate what Wim will say. I watched him with 100-something people, with all of us together, and we all did the full ice water. And he says, effing demystify. He goes, this is all an ability we forgot to be able to do. You want an effing prayer? Here's an effing prayer. He speaks 5 languages. He throws his hands together, rattles off a Hindu chant. He goes, effing demystify. He goes, this is an ability. It's in your genes. You can do this. Yeah. And so we're doing it. And what does that mean? It's like we're getting these little tiny pinholes into abilities that are not only allowing us to control an inflammatory sick when we're generally sick, it just any, it's not like we're destroying disease, but our ability, the placebo effect, we're learning that the skin can see through infrared. Like there's a whole doctorate neurologist, there's a great TED talk, 30 minutes of explaining how we're just learning that the skin has a neural network independent of the brain and can process and see infrared light, among other things. It can actually see and communicate. You mix that with synesthesia, these rediscovered abilities, these superhumans, movement culture, and the reality is that there does seem to be a quickening of this, not just a peace and harmony of reconnecting to the earth and like this existential sense, but that the earth is part of a system that we engineered that allows us to kick back into that human consciousness and pull back out of this amnesia, like Graham Hancock says, this just that we just have this amnesia about who we were or what we are, and actually activate it. And it's very grounding. It's very interesting. So we have a current, I think, revolution of this experience of living, that we all have to be personal experimenters. It is a search and rescue of our past because it applies to these abilities. And then it applies to the technology that we aren't applying currently to construction or biology, and therefore medical technology. We're not fully there yet. And these abilities are helping us. And so the more I think we all practice and experiment, and dietary wise, food is programming versus food is a pleasure. It's not that you shouldn't enjoy eating, but it's the only time, if we had a Ferrari, it's not like you put oil in the gas tank or gas in the radiator fluid.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
So that all ties together.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know you got to jam and get to your next lily pad here and do another interview. So
yeah, usually I don't stop. This is a first, so I apologize. I don't like to cut anyone short ever.
No, that's okay. That's okay. This has been great. And we're just scratching the surface. And obviously there's more, and Jared has a book, and it's not aliens, worse, it's us. And he has a website, and you can get the book on a number of places, Amazon, your own website, correct?
Yeah, I will send you a personal signed copy. I don't have them pre-signed, but if for a few dollars more, if you want to go to notaliens.com, I will sign and send you a copy.
There you go, notaliens.com. Jared, it's been great, and love to have you back again someday. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
I really appreciate being on, and let's plan that. Let's do that.
Okay, take good care.
You too.
Bye-bye. Bye. All right, there he is. Jared Murphy. Great show, huh? Wow. What a journey that was. Fantastic. It's great to, talk with somebody who has a science background and can really make some interesting and valid points to demystify some of the some of the what I would call false mythologies. I'm a big fan of mythology. Don't get me wrong, but bringing it back down to ground level, right? Bringing it back down right to terra firma, which is really what he's doing in a lot of ways, is really liberating. Because we have to reconstruct our own, how do I say this, personology, because we've been on this path where it's just been outside of ourselves, whether it's high priests or whether it's stars in Hollywood or whether it's athletes or whatever these things are, whatever kind of projection we've been involved in for X number of years, like that has got to come to an end. If we have any chance, any shot with waking up during a time where it feels like there's this greatest compression ever in my lifetime that's taking place, forcing us to squeeze through and get to the next level, this is, I think, what we have to do. And we're all responsible for it. We all have our own accountability to bring that out inside of ourselves, for ourselves and for others, but mainly for ourselves. Let's see, what do we have here? Yeah, that was a good one. Thank you, Steve, for bringing Jared on. And I'm sure I had a vision of Jared being on Joe Rogan in about 2 months. You guarantee you he'll make the rounds with Rogan. All right, there's a lot going on with out there. There's a lot happening. I wanted to show you guys a video, and let me see if I have it here. I'm going to show you a video, and it's a little off topic, but it's still kind of in an area that that we're sort of swimming around in, and it's a starting point. It is clearly a starting point. Now, it is a little slow, but I'm not going to play the whole thing. But it's really worth watching. Okay, it's really. And everything starts with no. Like, no. Just not going to do it. We're not consenting. So let me show you this video. I got to go track it down again because I used the tab. Give me 1 second. I'm almost there. I'm cruising. I'm going to find it. All right, here it is. I want you guys to pay attention to this. I'm going to set the table. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so this is from Liverpool, and it was uploaded on the 7th of November. And there are two bobbies, I guess, policemen, and they're going into a play center. This is where kids will go, will pay some money, they'll jump around on trampolines, throw plastic balls at each other, stuff like that. And this is the third time they've come to this guy's place. And they are going to try to find him. Watch what happens. Find, F-I-N-E. Watch what happens here. Pay attention. It's this is basically common law 101. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I'm going to play some and I'm going to skip ahead. Okay, watch this. Here they come.
Pardon? Why is that, sir?
Because you're opening restrictions to be able to take you up on the issues that you've already found once before.
But I don't wish to enter into a contract with you. I don't consent.
You're not entering into a contract with me. This is a government restriction that's been issued across the country.
I can't hear a word you're saying, sorry, mate.
I can't take my mask off, can I? Because I'm in public. But as you know, if I can open the
Do you want to step into the
yeah,
office?
of course, mate, yeah.
So he immediately said, I don't wish to enter into a contract with you. Remember that. There's the witness. She's going to be there.
Sorry, yeah. I don't know if you've been talking to you before or not. It's the first time I've met you. It's the first time I've been here. We've been sent at the request of environmental health to ensure that you're staying closed, which obviously you're not. We've got to inform you that at the moment Liverpool's under a tier 3 lockdown because of COVID, isn't it? We're about to go into tier 4 as of Thursday coming. You've been told already by environmental health not to open. You are obviously still open. I think someone came around yesterday and you issued with
I didn't consent to that though.
right, okay, that's not
I didn't consent to that.
no problem. You were given a fixed penalty yesterday. Obviously, you're still open now. Are you continuing to remain open?
We are.
Are you aware of what the government's guidelines are in terms
I don't
of,
consent or enter into any contract with the government or anyone.
I'm not saying you consent, I'm saying do you understand what they are?
I don't have to answer that.
Right, okay. Well, the business that you're in terms of the soft play, unfortunately, that falls under the category of a restricted business that can't be open under the tier 3 lockdown. If you're continuing to remain open beyond all reasonable options that we can give you to take, we'll have to issue with another fine. Do you understand that?
I don't understand anything. I do not stand under you, sir. So I
don't understand anything. I don't stand under you.
I'm
don't
not asking you to
understand.
stand under me. I'm just
Well,
asking, do you understand what the government guidelines are?
Well,
Do you understand that as a result of the government guidelines?
I don't understand. I don't stand under you.
What is it you don't understand?
I've just said I don't understand. I don't
Well,
stand
what am I
under
doing?
you.
I'm not asking you
I
to
don't
stand
stand under nobody.
I'm not asking you to stand under me. I'm asking, do you understand what the government
I do not
guidelines are?
understand.
What don't you understand?
I don't understand.
Can I explain anything anymore to help you understand?
You can't. You can speak what you want. This is my right to say to you. I do not understand.
I'm not here as an individual. I'm not here
Well,
to say you can't be open. I'm here doing my job, following the guidelines that have been given to everyone across the country.
I appreciate that.
I
I really
I'm not
do.
here to target you as an individual or as your business. This is not personal.
Well,
This is something that we're all falling under, unfortunately.
we're in a children's play centre. You've turned up in the full attire.
Yeah.
It's quite daunting.
I'm in
It's
my
quite daunting.
day-to-day uniform, unfortunately.
It's quite daunting for children to witness. I don't consent to any contract. I appreciate you've got a job to do, and I appreciate your time, but I don't enter into any contract. I don't consent, and I don't understand. I don't stand under you.
Right, okay. Unfortunately, you don't have to consent to this because this is a committing offence. You're committing an offence by keeping your business open.
Am I committing a crime?
It's an offence. It's an offence under a tier 3 restriction. Okay. It's the way it's going to be handled with if you're refusing to close and remain open, it should be issued with another fine. Okay.
Well, I don't consent to that fine.
That's fine.
I don't consent to that fine.
And I don't enter into that contract.
It's not a contract, as I've explained.
Well, I don't enter into any contract.
That's fine. It's not a contract. Though.
Are you the manager or the owner?
I don't have to answer that.
Do you hear that? I don't have to answer that.
Is it Mr. Orr, is it?
I don't have to answer that.
Right.
What do you see me as here?
Well, you're the one who's asking all these questions.
No, you just asked me.
You're the one who's asked us
Well,
into your office.
You asked me the questions. I asked you into the office because I couldn't
So-
hear you under a mask.
Okay, so the fact that you're asking us into the office, I would make it reasonably assumption that it is your business or you are the manager of this business. Is that right, or is it yourself?
You're the one asking the questions, sir, but I asked you into the office out of courtesy because I couldn't hear what you were saying underneath that mask.
Yeah.
So if you want to take the mask off out there, we can take it out there. But I asked you into the office so I could hear you, what you were saying.
That's great. So it's your office.
I just asked you what you consider me as.
Right, we're not here to try and slip you up, okay? I'm not here to try and...
Okay, so what happens here, these guys just keep trying to get him on the fish hook. They just keep trying to get him on the fish hook. And then he just continues to, parry the thrust.
Get someone else down here, which is what you don't want. You've already said you don't want the police coming here.
So he's talking about escalating now.
For reasons you don't want the police, you can place the business.
Just think where we are.
Yeah,
Please.
that's why I'm trying to explain to you. I'm trying to be reasonable with
I
you.
do not consent. I do not enter into any contract with you. I do not understand. And now, by you saying you want to remain, I'm going to say I feel a little bit intimidated and threatened now because there's no further action.
What do you mean?
What I say?
He's basically telling him, look, if you're not going to do anything, you need to leave. So then what they try to do is they try to write him up. Like they're trying to write him up here.
It's our police systems.
Do you mind if I have a drink?
No, you can have a drink. Short place of work, isn't it?
He's going to have a beer. So they're trying to figure out what to do, how they're going to handle it.
What's your address now, Mr. O?
I don't wish to tell you that, sir.
He's like looked him up. He says, I don't wish to tell you that. So they're doing some kind of a
This is unbelievable. This.
search, trying to get his name.
Surely you don't want to be here.
Mr. O, as my colleagues explained to you as best as we possibly can, the law is the law, unfortunately. Okay, we don't have a say over the law, and we're just remaining impartial to this. Okay, I've never dealt with you before or yourself. I've never been here before.
No,
There's absolutely no reason why either of us take any delight in dealing with you.
Trying to be
or
reasonable.
this property, this premises. Okay, but unfortunately,
I can tell you don't want to be here. It's
as my colleagues explained to you, officers were out yesterday to this address, spoke to staff members. A fixed penalty was issued by yourself after being warned, and environmental health are aware and also involved with regards to this. It was themselves who we've asked us to attend today.
environmental health. We're taking photographs of children with no permission.
That's all we can't comment on. We don't represent environmental health. I don't know who that was, so unfortunately I can't comment on that.
So I'm going to fast forward this here. He's going to try to give him a ticket, but he won't take it.
Okay.
He won't sign it. And then these
What a
guys,
crime.
Well, you by breaching these regulations, that is an offence. That's why we're here. That's why.
So it's not a crime.
Well, it is, isn't it?
So who's the victim?
The victim's the government, isn't it?
The-
Regina, it's called.
So
do you hear this? You got to hear this. Here we go.
you or anyone at government, and I don't consent, and I do not understand.
Okay.
Is there a crime here? Has there a crime taken place?
Is there a crime? Have I committed a crime?
Is there a crime?
Well, you by breaching these regulations, that is an offence. That's why we're here. That's why.
So it's not a crime.
Well, it is, isn't it?
So who's the victim?
The victim's the government, isn't it? Regina, it's called.
So there is a crime and there is a victim.
It's an offence, isn't it?
You
So
just said it's a
therefore,
crime, and you said the government is the
so it's a
victim.
law in place. So if you're not following that law, then it becomes a crime, isn't it?
I disagree with that.
Eve, is there anything you want to ask us, anything you want to clarify, anything you're unsure of about why we're here and what we want for obvious reasons, but as a result of your actions, that's what's happening. If you weren't doing this, the police wouldn't be here. It's a vicious circle, isn't it? As my colleague explained, the fines will more than likely increase. Up until what point, I don't know, until we decide the fines, okay? Is there anything else you want to ask?
No.
Okay, and you're refusing to sign notice of your fixed penalty.
I won't be
As I said,
signing
it's not a
anything.
contract, it's not an agreement, it's not an admission of guilt. It is just you're acknowledging the fact that you're going to be processed and potentially fined for keeping your business open when it's restricted.
I don't acknowledge that, and I won't be signing it.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Okay.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
No worries, I'll read that's fine now.
Boom. Do you see what happened just there? Do you see what happened? At every turn, they wanted to get him to consent, and he didn't do it. He did not consent. He said, I do not wish to enter into any contract. I choose not to enter into any contract. Yeah, the kids did sound like they're having a good time, right? I mean, that's the whole crazy thing. I thought about that too. It's like, here this guy is just stonewalling, those Matrix bots. And then you hear the sound of the kids in the background, and they're laughing and they're running around, and they're playing. And it's like such a disparate reality between what's going on in there and it's like they're two different planets that are experiencing two different realities. But he winds up basically sending them packing because he doesn't consent. And every time they try to hook him in, do you understand? He says, I do not understand, and I do not stand under. I stand under for no man. And he keeps doing this consistently. And then the guy says, well, you're committing a crime. He says, well, if I'm committing a crime, then who's the victim? And then he changes it to an offense. Well, you just said I was committing a crime, and I asked you who the victim was. Who is the victim? Well, he says the government's the victim. Oh, really? Well, how can the government be the victim when they're the ones that are essentially perpetrating the crime? And the crime being that he can't run his business in a way that allows him and the kids and the patrons of that business to fully experience that business. That's a crime against him. So this is basic common law. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. So there's a lot of shit coming down, okay? There's a lot of shit coming down. So you've got to be able, we're going to try and get, I think it's KL from Crow on here to talk about some of this stuff. Natasha, I'm going to put this right up there. There we go. Hold on. Right there. The important thing is to stay calm and know what to say. This right here. Stay calm. You've got to stay calm. You've got to stay calm, which means you've got to deal with your anger issues in another way. You've got to be surgical with this stuff. You've got to be up here, right? You've got to be right up here. I do have a link to the video. I'll put it right in here for you guys. Pass it around. I've sent it to a few people. Let me, right here, pass it around. It's right here. And I'll make sure I put a link in the description of the show page. There it is. You guys grab that. It's right there. Okay? So I want to leave you with that. We have to start somewhere. We have to start somewhere. We have to have some kind of a baseline. And the baseline is in moments like that. And we're going to be dealing with a lot more moments like that, especially if Mr. Biden, whoever that impersonator is, along with the impersonator known as Kamala, wind up assuming office. And that's a whole other story that is going to unfold. In the meantime, go check out Jared's website. And there's a book there. He'll take you down a very interesting place of discovery. And you'll be able to sort of bring home this idea that we are way more than we think we were or are and can be. And I think that's where we're all going to need to go. And let's get there as soon as we possibly can. All right. I'm Robert Phoenix. Thank you, Chatlandia. You're the best. Appreciate you all. Hit that like button. Pass along the show. And there is a link in the show page if you'd like to support the show as well. In the meantime, use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to step when it's possible. And I'll be back on Sunday night, and we'll be looking at some astrology for, well, I guess it's going to be the week ahead of a few charts that we'll dive into. And I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about as it relates to what's going to happen tomorrow. As Mars is stationed today, goes direct tomorrow. There's going to be a whole lot of people in Washington, D.C. A whole lot of people. All right. Take good care. Thanks for your support. And we're going to get through this. And all we need is just one victory. See you later.